By 1975, Phoenix was over. The US Army had already pulled out. South Vietnam was collapsing.
I sincerely felt and still feel that the CIA's evacuation from Vietnam in 1975 was one of the most dishonorable chapters in US history.
In March 1975, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese launched an all-out attack on the South. Within weeks, South Vietnamese resistance crumbled.
The President has ordered the evacuation of the remaining Americans from Vietnam. The military situation around Saigon, particularly at the airport, has deteriorated to such an extent that this measure has become necessary to ensure their safety.
On the 29th of April, Saigon's airport was overrun. Helicopters now provided the only means of evacuation. The last CIA chief of station in Vietnam was Tom Polgar.
For an evacuation, you need several things. First, you need a plan. Then you need authority. Then you need money to implement it. Then you need the vehicles, be they ships or aeroplanes or helicopters. And finally, you need a place to take people to. All of these things happen to be missing. I would say that Americans are not particularly good losers. And to plan for a loss is not part of the American official mentality. There were a lot of people who couldn't bring themselves to believe that such a thing would occur. There was no contingency plan for giving up Vietnam. Indeed, we didn't have any plan for evacuating any Vietnamese at all.
The US Embassy in Saigon. The CIA occupied the top 3 floors. These rooms once housed the largest CIA station in the world. It was the last building abandoned by the Americans when they pulled out. Only a few of their Vietnamese helpers escaped with them.
This room, which is so barren now, was the CIA primary radio room. And a lot of CIA operatives carried little radios on their belt known as Diamond Net radios. That was sort of the code word for the system. And they left these radios strewn around Saigon, and Vietnamese who'd been left behind were grabbing up these radios and calling in. And I remember very vividly standing in this room with voices coming in over the radio circuits, Vietnamese calling for help, desperate for help. I'm Mr. Han, the translator. Come rescue me. I'm Miss Chi, your driver. Please don't forget me. I have my mother here. We'll be killed by the communists. In fact, it's a memory of the last day that has never left me. I have been plagued with nightmares. I call them sound mares, of Vietnamese screaming over this radio for help, and these walls literally seem to reverberate with their cries of panic. I saw it as the most heinous betrayal of our friends. The only thing you have to offer a source is loyalty and the assurance you will take care of them. And when you abandon a source, you'll never hire or recruit a new source. They'll never trust you. And so what we did in Vietnam those final days was to commit the one error that an intelligence officer must never make. We let people who work for us see that in a crunch, we wouldn't do anything to help them. No one who has seen that incredible picture of the helicopter sitting on top of the deputy CIA station chief's house with the man leaning over helping Vietnamese up the ladder on the last day, that famous picture could suppress emotion about Vietnam. On the last day of the war, when the Americans evacuated, we didn't even have a list in the embassy of the Vietnamese we should be pulling out.
Come on, this way, hey!
That sums up our sin of omission. We failed to plan in time or adequately for any kind of evacuation. And that resulted from wishful thinking, the hope that the war really wasn't over, that everything could be turned around through a last-minute political fix, all of which, strangely enough, was contrary to our best intelligence. If we believed our intelligence, the evacuation would have been planned at least weeks in advance.
The speed of South Vietnam's collapse caught everyone by surprise. Washington decision-makers were worried that advanced planning would have created panic and hastened the collapse.
The reaction in Washington was nothing. There just was no reaction. Within CIA, people kept cheering and saying, wonderful reporting, wonderful reporting. But on the policy-making mechanisms and on President Ford, I think the impact was zero. It was absolutely the worst, most frustrating, most humiliating experience that I've had in my life before or since. But when a person decides to work for CIA, that doesn't mean that CIA sort of assumes the role of a guardian over his future fate. It's an adult person, he makes a conscious decision, he knows that there are certain risks connected with that decision, and quite often he also gets paid for it or compensated another way. But we didn't have sort of a bunch of innocent virgins here whom we seduced.
During the middle of the afternoon on the last day, large helicopters began landing in this courtyard to evacuate the Vietnamese and the Americans here, the last of us. And as they began to land, many bags of half-shredded classified documents, which had been set out along the edge of the parking lot here to be burned, broke open. And there were pieces of classified material, the most highly classified stuff we had in the embassy, clinging to the trees around the compound. Confetti, which the communists, when they came in, pieced together to get a picture of some of the secrets we'd left behind. We turned over to the communists, or allowed to be captured by the communists, a virtual blood list, which facilitated their targeting of people who had worked with us in Phoenix and other pacification programs.
All our documents were very conscientiously destroyed. There was a catch, however. We did a considerable amount of intelligence exchange with our South Vietnamese counterparts. So it is conceivable that documents reflecting CIA intelligence, but rewritten, according to our normal procedures when we send documents to the Vietnamese, would have remained undestroyed. So I'm sure that there was probably a rich haul.
When Tom Polgar says that we burned out all the files, he's referring to the internal CIA files that would have a CI, like a headquarters classification. And those files, CIA officers burned because those files could ruin their careers. Outside of our own internal offices, we had interrogation centers. We ran joint operations with the police, sharing information with them, including operational information with them, of our most sensitive operations in Vietnam, and all of those files were left intact. My estimation is that 98% of the Vietnamese case officers who worked for us, and many, if not all, of the agents, were identifiable by the files that were left behind. If there is any integrity in the spy business, people who would do such a thing should be stood in front of a wall and shot.
Well, I'm sure there are small mistakes made here and there. I don't know about that. But the basic conclusion of the event, here you're talking about the collapse of a nation. The American records were destroyed or removed. The Vietnamese records throughout the country were not totally destroyed. But those were Vietnamese records. Those are the usual complaints, that the Vietnamese special branch, the Vietnamese remnants of the Phoenix were still extant there and not destroyed. Well, I think it's a large chore to send the Americans around to destroy all the Vietnamese records. Secondly, were people left behind? Yes. But were any Americans left behind? No.
For the communists, the victory was total. The United States was forced to confront defeat by a peasant power. Guerrilla warfare, not tanks and planes and bombs, had won.